Hello, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec podcast, where we triple your impact per engineer. As always, I'm your host, Aviv Ben-Yosef, advisor and consultant to the best tech executives worldwide, and our subject today is talent cultivation. If you listened to the previous episode, you know that we started a brief series about assessing an R&D team and how to move past the basic delivery into higher impact work. As I say at the beginning of every episode, we want to triple impact per engineer, and that, my friends, is not done by getting your people to type a lot faster. And the previous episode was about moving past road delivery and how to nail the basics, the fundamentals of delivery, so we can talk about more interesting stuff. And today we'll be talking about talent. How do you get your talent to be where it needs to be? And I want to share a few metrics for assessing how well your team, your organization is doing. And if you do this on your own, you can check out, there's a link in the show notes to download a PDF with all of the metrics I'll be talking about in the series. But if you're doing it by yourself, of course, you're not working with someone like me, you might not have a bunch of data to compare yourself to. So you might not easily tell whether you're doing better or worse than others, but I do believe that merely collecting this will give you a bunch of insights, as I've seen in my work with others. So let's talk about your talent. How can you tell whether your team is doing well or not? And I think that there's a lot of stuff, and it's really hard to try and measure how well your culture is, how well your people are doing. So I try to come up with a bunch of things that are relatively easier to measure, so you're not going to have to spend a lot of time collecting the data, but that I think will help you get a good sense of how well your team is doing. First of all, I want you to consider your team's morale. And I know this is probably the hardest one to measure, but a lot of the leaders I work with have a gut instinct, and if you're relatively small, I trust that gut instinct. If you're bigger, try holding, even an anonymous survey, or asking all your managers to try and rate how happy they think their people are. And I believe that having an anonymous survey is, it takes you probably like 5 minutes to set it up during one of the common tools like Typeform or whatever, and you can get a quick sense of how you're doing. I will say that there is value in having a third party hold these surveys, because, for example, if I do this, I can ask clarifying questions, and I can notice if there are issues with a specific team, for example, which is not as easy to do if you want to hold a really anonymous survey without having anyone in the company know what people are saying. If you have a third-party person to help you with that, they can drill into issues without anyone feeling like they have to hold things back, but get the morale. And again, if you're small, if it's hard for you, just start by going over the different people in your company in your mind and think about how well do you think they feel about the company. Try and assign a number, 1 to 10, and see how you feel like your organization averages. Next, let's think about how your talent is growing. I've talked a bunch on this podcast about the importance of talent growth, of seeing that every single person on your team continuously improves and becomes noticeably better, especially nowadays where we're in a no-growth economy, where so many teams are stuck with the people they have for the next year or so. And I say stuck in air quotes because you love them, but still, you're not going to get any more growth. And therefore, your growth, your acceleration comes not from increasing headcount, but making each and every individual better. And how do you get there? You invest in their coaching, etc. But to assess how well you're doing there, to decide whether you have to get an external injection of experience, have someone help you become a better coach, have someone coach your coaches. Before you get there, consider how well your talent growth is already. One quick way to do that, which I invented, is called a Peter Pan count. You all know Peter Pan, you know his lost boys. They never grow up. They never go from juniors to mid to seniors. We don't want that. So you need to consider how many Peter Pans you have in your company. Go over your organization and count. You or review managers, of course, consider how many people have not had a noticeable improvement in their work in the past 12 to 18 months or so. And those are your Peter Pans, people who have remained static for about a year. These are people who are not growing. And sometimes it's just because they're a poor fit. Sometimes it's because you fail when it comes to exposing them to a nurturing and experience-inducing culture and atmosphere when it comes to for example, if they just keep on getting the same stupid tasks, they just keep doing the same types of bugs, how are they going to improve? That sort of stuff. And next, I want you to consider all sorts of metrics that can help you assess how well you're doing compared to others. If you don't have anyone to ask and you're not working with a coach like me, maybe you can find a community. By the way, I have a community, more in the last probably 10 seconds of this episode. So count your turnover. How many people leave the company regularly? And how many of those do that because they are not satisfied or because you had to let go of them because of poor performance or poor culture fit? I'm not talking about cost cutting. Consider your pay. What is the mean and average engineer pay? And consider where are you placed in relation to the market and how competitive you want to be and tend to be. Average tenure. In startups that just underwent hypergrowth, your median tenure in the team is relatively low. You had a lot of people onboarded recently, and that means that you have to pay extra effort in maintaining and cultivating a healthy culture. Otherwise, you're going to see things get shaky really fast. And lucky for you, let's look at the cup half full. Let's look at the positive spin on things. Because you're now going through a no growth period, you can invest more time in coaching your people, in helping them grow, in making them better. You're not spending all your time interviewing, onboarding. Your managers have more wiggle room. Use that in order to make everyone better in the company. And lastly, there are two metrics that you should be considering together: planned growth and engineer per user. Planned growth is look forward and what sort of growth are you planning in the upcoming year? Will you be replacing people if they leave? I know some companies that have now decided that even if someone leaves, unless it's really critical, they're not going to be hiring someone to replace them. Or do you feel like you'll need to promote a manager? What is the churn that you expect? You just calculated your turnover. How many people can you expect to leave in the next year? And therefore, what will you do about it? Do you have a hunch who those people might be? Plan that in order to assess your growth, because even to remain static, you usually have to hire some people instead of those who are leaving. And engineer per user, engineer per end user maybe, is about how much overhead do you have. In my upcoming book, Capitalizing on Your Technology, I talk about R&D as something that has to have profitable growth. If your R&D has to grow linearly with the user base, with the growth of the company, you're not building a high margin R&D team. That's not what we're after. We're after the magical thing about software is this whole notion where you write it once and a lot of people can use it at virtually no cost to the company. And that's what we want to create. Something that means that we don't have to keep scaling the organization solely to hold the business scale. Yeah, you might need to grow in general, but we don't want to be linearly growing with the user base. Think about WhatsApp. Think about Instagram. Each had tens and hundreds of millions of users with about 8 dozen engineers. That's incredible. And I see so many teams nowadays that have just 8 dozen people working on half of their mobile apps. And I'm not even counting the rest of the product that they're working on. It's just ridiculous, especially if you only have, 10 to 20 enterprise users. I don't know how we got there. I'm not surprised the market is currently punishing all of those teams that thought that they can just grow for the sake of growth. But now is your time to start investing in your talent and making sure that you strike the right balance. Don't overgrow. Don't just throw more hands at keyboards, but create a team that can deliver something amazing. You have the headspace now because you're not growing as fast as you used to. Make the most out of it. Never waste a good crisis. Okay? So that's it. This week about talent. Next week, we'll continue on this series. Thank you for joining me. If you haven't yet, do subscribe to my newsletter. It's the best newsletter online for tech executives. And if you're not satisfied, I'll give you your money back. Link in the show notes. And of course, do check out my community, the Leading Edge Club, a global community for executives in tech. We've got CTOs, CEOs, CPOs, what have you, more than 100 people from all over the world. And if you're looking someone to compare your notes to, do check out the community. Link in the show notes. Thank you. Talk soon.